girl did something no one could explain. The baby's eyes opened for the first time in 6 weeks, and everyone in the room stopped breathing. Not because a 6-week-old opening his eyes was remarkable, any infant did that, but because William Charles Thornfield, heir to the Ashworth Duchy, had been declared permanently blind at birth by London's finest physician. Incurable, they'd said, hopeless, a tragedy the family would simply have to bear. Yet here he was, his gray-green eyes tracking the candlelight Mary Ashford held above his face, following the flame as she moved it left, then right, then up. Watching, seeing, impossible. "How did you do this?" the Duke whispered, staring at the servant girl who'd been cast out, arrested, nearly hanged for trying to save his son. How? Mary looked up from the baby in her arms, exhausted, vindicated, and utterly calm. "I didn't do anything miraculous, Your Grace. I just refused to believe that blindness was his fate when everything I'd learned from my mother and grandmother told me it wasn't." She gently touched the infant's cheek as he blinked in the light, his pupils contracting properly for the first time in his short life. "I saw what everyone else refused to see, and I trusted truth over authority." 6 weeks earlier, the cold hadn't cared that she was innocent. It seeped through the thin fabric of her dress, through skin, through bone, until Mary Ashford could no longer tell where the December frost ended and her own body began. Her knees pressed against the frozen mud outside the estate gates, the same gates she had walked through every morning for 3 years, the same gates that were now locked against her. Blood stained the hem of her dress, not her own. The Duchess's fingernails had drawn it when she'd clawed at Mary's face, screaming words that still echoed in the winter air. "You did this. You cursed him. You blinded my son." Mary's hands trembled as she clutched the small bronze locket at her throat, the only thing her mother had left her before the fever took her. Everything else was gone: her position, her character reference, the small room above the kitchen where she'd slept for 1,000 nights, all of it stripped away in the span of an hour. The physician had stood there in his fine coat, his face grave and certain. "The child was born blind," he'd pronounced, as though he were God himself delivering judgment, "damaged beyond repair. And this girl, she was the only one present when the affliction manifested." It wasn't true. None of it was true. Mary had done everything right. She'd boiled the water. She'd kept the linens clean. She'd held the Duchess's hand through every contraction and whispered the same prayers her mother had whispered over dozens of births. When the baby came, small and perfect and wailing, his eyes had been closed like any newborn's. It was only later, when the physician finally arrived from London, that he'd examined the child and declared him blind. But the Duchess needed someone to blame, and a servant girl with no family and no voice was an easy target. The iron gates loomed above her now, black and unforgiving. Beyond them, she could see the warm glow of the manor house windows. Inside those walls, a motherless child lay in a cradle, his future already written by a lie she couldn't fight. Mary tried to stand, her legs buckled. She'd been on her feet for 36 hours during the labor. She'd had nothing to eat since yesterday's breakfast, and when the Duchess had ordered the footmen to remove her, they'd done so with such force that her shoulders still throbbed. She forced herself upright, swaying. The lane stretched before her, dark and empty. The nearest village was 4 miles away. She'd never make it in this cold, not without a cloak, not in her state. But staying here meant freezing to death within sight of the house that had been her home. Mary took one step forward, then another. Her breath came in short, visible clouds. The locket swung against her chest with each movement, a tiny, persistent weight. Her mother's face rose in her memory, kind eyes, work-worn hands, a voice that never lied. "The truth has a way of surviving, Mary, even when everything else is buried." Behind her, the manor house blazed with light and warmth. Ahead, there was only darkness, and the terrible, fragile hope that somewhere in that darkness, the truth might still matter. The sound reached her first, hooves on frozen ground, moving fast. Mary had made it perhaps half a mile down the lane before her body had finally betrayed her. She'd collapsed against a stone wall, her vision swimming, her limbs no longer obeying her will. The cold had stopped feeling like cold. It felt like nothing at all now, which she knew was worse. Then the hooves stopped. "Christ!" The voice was male, low, shocked. Footsteps crunched through frozen grass. A dark figure loomed above her, broad-shouldered and tall, backlit by the weak afternoon. Can you hear me? Can you speak?" Mary's lips moved, but no sound came out. She felt hands, large, careful hands, touching her throat, finding her pulse. The touch was so gentle it made something crack open in her chest. No one had touched her with gentleness in so long. "She's alive," the man said, speaking to someone else. "Barely. Thomas, my coat, now." "Your Grace, she's just No." The authority in that single word cut through even Mary's fading consciousness. Your Grace, the Duke, he'd been in London when the baby came. The Duchess had been furious about his absence, had raged about it between contractions. Heavy wool settled over Mary's body, still warm from someone else's heat. She tried to speak, to defend herself against whatever accusation would come next, but her voice emerged as barely a whisper. "The baby, I didn't." "Don't speak." His hands moved to her shoulders, assessing. When his fingers found the bruises the footman had left, she felt him go still. "Who did this to you?" Mary's eyes focused enough to see his face. Sharp features, dark hair disheveled from riding, eyes nearly black in the shadow. He wasn't looking at her the way the physician had, with disgust and certainty. He was looking at her the way her mother used to look at broken things that might still be mended. "Your household," she managed, "they threw me out." Something flickered across the Duke's face, confusion, then a flash of something darker. "On whose orders?" "The Duchess," Mary's voice was fading. "The physician, they blamed me for." She couldn't finish. Her body had reached its limit. The world tilted sideways. "Thomas, help me get her to the horse. Carefully, support her head." She was placed side saddle on the horse, and then the Duke swung up behind her, one arm coming around to hold her steady against his chest. She should have been afraid. She'd never been this close to a man of his station. But exhaustion and cold had burned away her capacity for fear. "What's your name?" he asked as the horse began to move. "Mary Ashford, your Grace. I delivered your son. And I swear to you, I swear on my mother's grave, I did everything." "How long have you been out here?" The question caught her off guard. "I don't since this morning, after they." "This morning," he repeated it flatly. "They put you out in December, in this cold, without a cloak." It wasn't a question. Mary didn't answer. They were approaching the gates. Mary could see the gatehouse keeper emerging, his face going slack with shock at the sight of the Duke, holding the disgraced servant girl. "Open the gates," the Duke commanded. "Your Grace," the Duchess gave strict orders that the girl was not to. "I don't recall asking about my wife's orders. I am giving you a direct command. Open the gates." The keeper scrambled to obey. The Duke guided the horse directly to the front entrance, not the servants' entrance where Mary had spent 3 years entering and leaving, but the main doors reserved for family and guests of rank. He carried her through himself, past his wife's frozen form at the top of the stairs, up to the blue room on the second floor. "On whose orders?" the Duchess demanded from above them, her silk gown trembling, her face pale with rage. "On mine," the Duke said quietly. "Go back to your rooms, Catherine." He carried Mary the rest of the way, without slowing. Mary woke to whiteness, white ceiling, white linens, white winter light streaming through tall windows she'd only ever seen from the outside when scrubbing the front steps. This wasn't the servants' quarters. This was the blue room, a guest room, a room for people who mattered. She sat up too quickly and immediately regretted it. Pain shot through her shoulder and her head swam. A steady hand pressed against her back. "Easy now, child. You've been asleep for 14 hours. Mrs. Pemberton sat in a chair beside the bed. The housekeeper had been at Ashworth Manor for 30 years and ran the household with quiet, absolute authority. "The Duke's orders were very specific," Mrs. Pemberton said, pouring water. "You're to be given every comfort until you've recovered." Mary took the glass with trembling hands. "I don't understand. Why would he? I'm nobody. I'm the one they blamed for." "For the child's blindness. Yes, I know." Mrs. Pemberton folded her hands in her lap. "I also know you, Mary Ashford. I've watched you work in this house for 3 years. I've seen how you tend to the injured kitchen cat that everyone else wanted to drown. I've heard you singing hymns while you scrubbed floors. So when the Duchess started screaming about curses and witchcraft, I knew it for what it was. A lie told by a desperate woman who needed someone to blame." "You believe me?" "I believe evidence." and the evidence is that you are a skilled, careful, God-fearing young woman who has never given anyone cause to doubt her character until the moment it became convenient to do so. Mrs. Pemberton stood. Now you'll eat, you'll rest, and when you're strong enough, His Grace wishes to speak with you. He has questions. The Duke entered 3 hours later. He knocked first. That alone startled her. Nobility didn't knock for servants. He entered at her quiet "come in" and left the door open exactly 4 inches. Proper, appropriate. "Miss Ashford, how are you feeling?" "Better, Your Grace, thank you." Mary started to stand. "You've been more than generous." "Please sit, you're still recovering." In daylight she could see him more clearly. He was perhaps 30, tall and lean, with the kind of face that was more interesting than handsome. He wore mourning clothes still, black coat, black waistcoat. Of course. His father had died only 6 months ago. The man before her was a duke still learning how to carry a title he'd inherited too young, with a wife he barely knew and a newborn son he'd never seen. "I need to understand what happened," he said quietly. "All of it." "What has the Duchess told you?" "That you were alone with my son when his affliction became apparent, that the physician confirmed the child was born blind, that you used some folk remedy during the birth that damaged the child's eyes." His voice was flat, reciting without inflection. "She claims you may have caused this." "And you believe her?" "I'm asking you for your version before I decide what I believe." Mary told him everything, the labor that had lasted nearly 2 days, the Duchess's pain and fear, the moment the baby finally came, small but healthy, crying strongly, how his eyes had been closed like any newborn's, how she'd cleaned him, wrapped him, placed him in his mother's arms. She kept asking if he was perfect, Mary said. If he was whole, she wouldn't stop asking, and then she sent for the physician. "Dr. Whitmore." Yes, he arrived from London that evening. He examined the baby and declared that the child couldn't see, that his eyes were damaged beyond repair. Mary paused, choosing her words. "And you disagreed." "I didn't examine the child the way a physician would, Your Grace. I'm not trained in medical science, but I've assisted at 43 births in my life, starting when I was 12 years old. I learned from my mother, who learned from her mother. And in all those births, I've seen 3 children who couldn't track light properly in their first days." The Duke's attention sharpened, and 2 of them were fine within a week. Their eyes just needed time. One had a condition my grandmother called the veil, a thin membrane over the eyes that prevented proper sight. She taught me how to recognize it and how to treat it: warm compresses soaked in eyebright and chamomile, applied twice daily, gentle massage at the temples. By 6 weeks, the child could see perfectly. The Duke was very still. "You think my son has this condition?" "I don't know, Your Grace. I wasn't allowed to examine him properly, but I know the physician declared him blind within hours of birth, which is far too soon to make such a diagnosis with certainty. I know newborns' eyes are often swollen and unfocused for days." Mary met his eyes. "And I know the Duchess was terrified of having a less than perfect child. I heard her say it during the labor, when the pain made her speak without thinking." The Duke's jaw tightened. He turned to look out the window, his profile hard against the winter light. "My wife comes from a family where appearances are everything, where weakness is unforgivable." He turned back to Mary. "You think she would rather blame you for my son's blindness than admit he might simply need time and care to heal?" "I think she was frightened, and I think the physician gave her an easy answer, someone to blame, a problem that could be removed from the house." Mary's hands clenched in her lap. "I'm not saying she's evil, Your Grace. I'm saying she was desperate. And desperate people do terrible things to people who have no power to defend themselves." The Duke studied her face for a long moment. "You're not what I expected," he said finally. "What did you expect?" "Someone broken, someone begging for mercy." He moved to the window. "I haven't seen my son yet. I arrived home, found you dying in the lane, and I've been managing the household. My wife is in her rooms, and I've been standing outside the nursery door for the past hour, unable to make myself walk inside." "Why?" "Because I'm terrified." He didn't turn around. "My father died in my arms 6 months ago. I inherited a title I'm not ready for, a wife I married for political alliance rather than affection. And now I have a son I've never met who may never see my face." His voice cracked slightly. "I don't know how to be a father to a child who's already been failed by everyone around him." Mary stood. She shouldn't have. It was improper for a servant to approach a duke uninvited, but she walked to where he stood and stopped a respectful distance away. "Let me see him," she said. The Duke turned to look at her. "What?" "Let me examine your son, properly, the way my mother and grandmother taught me." Mary's voice was steady. "If there's even a chance that he's not truly blind, if there's a chance he just needs care that no one has thought to give him, don't you want to know?" The physician said. The physician was wrong about me. Perhaps he's wrong about this too. Silence stretched between them. She could see him weighing risk against hope, propriety against desperation. "Come with me," he said finally. The nursery was on the third floor, at the far end of the family wing. A young wet nurse sat in a rocking chair, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in white linen. She stood quickly when the Duke entered, her eyes going wide when she saw Mary behind him. "Leave us," the Duke said quietly. "I'll call when you're needed." The nurse handed over the baby and left. The Duke stood in the middle of the room, holding his son for the first time. Mary watched his face transform, the hardness melting into something raw and unguarded. He looked down at the tiny face, the closed eyes and miniature features, and his hands began to shake. "He's so small," the Duke whispered. "He's perfect," Mary said gently. "May I?" He nodded and carefully transferred the baby to Mary's arms. She'd held hundreds of infants, but this one felt different. This one carried the weight of everything, her future, the truth, the hope that justice still existed somewhere in the world. Mary carried the baby to the window where the light was best. She examined his face with practiced care. The baby's eyes were closed but not sealed. She could see movement beneath the lids, the rapid flicker of infant dreams. With one finger, she gently touched the outer corner of his right eye. The baby stirred. His eyelid fluttered. "Talk to him," Mary said to the Duke. "Let him hear your voice." The Duke moved closer. "I don't know what to say." "Anything, just speak." "Hello," the Duke said softly. His voice was rough. "Hello, little one, I'm your father." The baby's face turned slightly toward the sound. Mary's breath caught. She looked up at the Duke, saw the same hope flaring in his eyes. "He responded to your voice," she whispered. She took the baby closer to the window, into indirect sunlight. Carefully, with the practiced gentleness of someone who'd done this before, she used her thumbs to gently open the baby's right eye. The Duke inhaled sharply. The eye was clouded, not blind exactly, but covered with a thin, milky film, exactly what Mary's grandmother would have called a veil. And beneath it, she could see the baby's pupil contract slightly, responding to the light. "Oh God," the Duke breathed, "he can see." Not clearly, not yet, but yes, he can detect light and shadow. With treatment, with care, Mary looked up at him, hardly daring to hope. "Your Grace, I think he can be healed." The Duke's composure cracked. He closed his eyes, his shoulders shaking with something between a laugh and a sob. When he opened them again, they were wet. "Are you certain?" "Not completely. I'm not a physician, but I've seen this before and I know it can be treated. It will take time, weeks, possibly months, consistent care, someone who knows what they're doing." Mary paused. "Someone you trust." The Duke looked at her, really looked at her, and in that moment, Mary felt the entire foundation of her world shift. "Stay," he said, "stay and heal my son." Before Mary could answer, the door burst open. The Duchess stood in the doorway, her face white with fury. Behind her, Dr. Whitmore had apparently returned from London, looking uncomfortable and trapped. "Get that witch away from my child," the Duchess hissed. The Duke turned slowly. When he spoke, his voice could have frozen fire. "That witch has just shown me that our son is not blind, that he has a treatable condition, and that the physician you trusted," he looked at Dr. Whitmore, "either didn't bother to examine him properly or lied about what he found." Dr. Whitmore's face went red. "Your Grace, I assure you, my diagnosis was based on." "On what? You examined him for 5 minutes and declared him permanently damaged. This girl identified a specific condition in less time and can cite precedent for treatment." The Duke's voice was deadly quiet. "Either you're incompetent, doctor, or you're complicit. Which is it?" "William," the Duchess's voice shook, "you cannot possibly believe her over a trained physician. She's a servant. She's nothing. She's the only person in this entire household who bothered to actually look at our son instead of jumping to conclusions that served their own purposes." The Duke's eyes were hard as stone. and she's staying, under my protection. Anyone who interferes with her access to the nursery or her care of the child will be dismissed. That includes you, Ka. The Rhines. You would threaten your own wife. I would do whatever is necessary to save my son's sight, which is what you should have done from the beginning instead of casting out the one person who might have helped him. He turned his back on her. Close the door on your way out. The Duchess and physician left. The door clicked shut. Mary and the Duke stood in the sudden silence, the baby stirring softly in Mary's arms. Thank you, the Duke said finally, for not giving up on him, for seeing what no one else would see. Mary looked down at the tiny face, at the eyes that might yet see the world clearly. I didn't do it for thanks, Your Grace. I know you did it because it was right. He paused. That's why I believe you. Outside the window, snow had begun to fall. Inside the nursery, a baby made a small, contented sound, and in the hallway beyond, Mary could hear voices, the Duchess and the physician, their words muffled but their tone unmistakable. They were plotting something. Mary knew the truth had a way of making desperate people even more dangerous, but she also knew that some fights were worth the risk. The treatment began that very night. Mary worked by candlelight in the nursery, the Duke watching from a chair near the fire as she prepared the first compress. She'd sent Mrs. Pemberton to the still room for eyebright and chamomile, herbs that grew in the estate's own gardens, nothing exotic, nothing that could be called witchcraft by any reasonable person. My grandmother used spring water for this, Mary said as she worked. The eyebright reduces inflammation, the chamomile soothes. Together, they help the body do what it wants to do anyway, heal. How long before we see improvement? The Duke asked. Days before we see any change at all, weeks before we know if it's working, months before his sight is clear. Mary tested the temperature of the compress against her wrist. This isn't magic, Your Grace, it's patience. She approached the cradle where the baby slept. With careful, practiced movements, she placed the warm compress over his closed eyes, holding it gently in place. The baby stirred but didn't wake. He needs to be kept in dimmer light, Mary explained. Not darkness but not bright sun. His eyes need to adjust gradually as the veil thins, and this needs to be done twice daily, morning and evening. The compress needs to be the right temperature, too hot and it could damage the delicate tissue, too cold and it does nothing. The wet nurse could. No, Mary's voice was firm. This requires someone who knows what they're doing, which means I need access to this nursery twice a day, every day, for as long as it takes. And I need your protection, because the moment your wife discovers what we're doing. She already knows. She saw you examining him. Then she'll act, soon. Mary removed the compress, checking the baby's skin. Your Grace, I need you to understand what you're risking by allowing this. If word spreads that you're letting a disgraced servant treat your heir with folk remedies after a physician has declared him incurable. My son's sight is worth any risk. Is it worth your reputation, your standing, your marriage? The Duke stood and crossed to where she worked. Up close, she could see the exhaustion in his face. He hadn't slept since returning from London. Miss Ashford, he said quietly, 6 months ago, I watched my father die slowly in terrible pain, while physicians pumped him full of mercury and arsenic and called it medicine. They bled him until he was white as paper. They assured me they were doing everything modern science allowed, and he died anyway. The Duke's voice was steady, but his eyes were haunted. So you'll forgive me if I don't put much faith in what educated men tell me is impossible. Mary held his gaze. Then you'll let me try. On one condition, you tell me the truth, all of it. If at any point you think the treatment isn't working, if you think he's getting worse, if you have even a moment's doubt, you tell me immediately. No false hope, no comforting lies. I've had enough of those to last a lifetime. I promise. Then yes, try, save my son. The words hung in the air between them like a vow. Mary turned back to the baby and began the gentle massage at his temples, tiny circular motions, the way her grandmother had shown her when she was barely old enough to hold an infant safely. The Duke watched in silence. Where did you learn this? He asked finally. My grandmother was a healer in our village. People came to her when the physicians were too expensive or too far away. She knew things, old things, passed down through women who had no books, no formal training, just observation and memory and trial and error across generations. My mother learned from her. I learned from my mother. It's nothing mystical, Your Grace. It's just knowledge that no one thought to write down because the women who held it couldn't write.
Tay, but you can.
My mother taught me. She said knowledge that lives only in memory dies too easily.
Smart woman.
She was, Mary's throat tightened. She died when I was 16, childbed fever after a difficult birth. She spent her last day telling me everything she hadn't taught me yet. Every remedy, every technique, every warning about what could go wrong. She made me promise I'd use what she taught me, that I'd help people, that I wouldn't let the knowledge die with her. The Duke was quiet for a long moment. She'd be proud of you. Mary had to look away before he could see the tears. 3 days passed, 3 days of Mary slipping into the nursery at dawn and dusk, applying compresses, performing massages, monitoring the baby's responses to light. 3 days of the Duke appearing at unpredictable hours to watch, to ask questions, to hover like a man afraid to hope, but unable to stop himself. 3 days of the Duchess's ominous silence. On the morning of the 4th day, Mrs. Pemberton warned her. She's been writing letters, to her family in London, to the bishop, to magistrates. Mrs. Pemberton's face was grim. She's building a case against you, child, be careful. Mary's hands didn't shake as she strained the herbs. Let her write her letters. The truth is the truth. The truth is what powerful people say it is. Mrs. Pemberton caught Mary's arm. I've seen this before. A servant girl accused by nobility. Even if you're innocent, even if you can prove it, the scandal alone could destroy you. They'll say you bewitched the Duke, that you used the child to gain access to the family, that you have designs on. She stopped. On him, Mary said. You're young and pretty, and you've been alone with His Grace more in the past 3 days than is strictly proper. People talk, and the Duchess knows exactly how to use that talk. What would you have me do? Stop treating the child. Let him stay blind when I know I can help him. I'm not saying stop. I'm saying be prepared for what's coming. What came arrived that afternoon. Mary was in the blue room, resting between treatments, when she heard the commotion downstairs. Raised voices, heavy footsteps. Mrs. Pemberton appeared in her doorway, her face pale. The magistrate is here, and the bishop's representative. The Duchess has made a formal accusation of witchcraft. Mary's blood turned to ice. She claims you've been performing pagan rituals over the child, that you've been using herbs and oils to enchant him, that you're holding unnatural influence over the Duke. Mrs. Pemberton's voice was urgent. They have the authority to arrest you. Let them come, Mary said, her voice steadier than she felt. I have nothing to hide. You have everything to hide if they've already decided you're guilty. But there was no time to argue. Footsteps approached down the hallway, multiple sets, heavy and purposeful. Mary stood, smoothing her borrowed dress, lifting her chin. The door opened. The Duke entered first, his face carved from stone. Behind him came a portly magistrate and a thin cleric in severe black, and behind them, triumphant and terrified in equal measure, the Duchess. Miss Ashford, the magistrate said formally, serious accusations have been brought against you. You are entitled to answer them. The Duchess stepped forward, that she has been practicing witchcraft, that she has been using dark arts on my innocent child, that she has bewitched my husband. Those are lies, Mary said clearly. The bishop's representative pulled a small book from his coat. We have been informed that you apply mysterious substances to the child's eyes, that you perform strange manipulations of his body, that you insist on working alone by candlelight. He looked at her with cold certainty. These are the marks of dark practice. Mary kept her voice level. I apply warm compresses made from eyebright and chamomile, herbs that grow in your own gardens, that have been used for healing for centuries, that any herbalist or apothecary would recognize. I perform gentle massage to encourage circulation, using lavender oil. I work at dawn and dusk, because those are the times when the light is ideal for checking the child's progress. There is nothing mysterious about any of it. Then why, the Duchess's voice was shrill, did the physician declare our son incurable? Why would you claim to know better than a man trained in London? Because he was wrong. The room went silent. Mary looked at the Duchess. Understanding flooded through her suddenly. You asked him, didn't you? Before the baby was even born, you asked him what would happen if the child was born less than perfect. And he told you exactly what you wanted to hear, that some things can't be fixed. that the kindest thing would be to accept it quickly and move on. The Duchess's face went white, then red. You conspired together, Mary said quietly, the pieces falling into place. He you a diagnosis that let you preserve your pride. A blind heir is a tragedy, but a blind heir whose mother tried everything, who consulted the finest physicians, that's something society forgives. But a child who could have been healed if someone had just bothered to try, that's negligence. That's failure. That's the one thing you couldn't accept. These are wild accusations, Deacon Morris began. Then let me prove they're not. Mary turned to the Duke. Your Grace, let me show them, let them see your son's progress. The Duke stepped forward. I will not have my infant son paraded before an inquisition like evidence in a trial, he said, his voice cutting through the tension. You come into my home and demand proof of witchcraft based on the word of a woman who has every reason to lie and a physician who is nowhere to be found to defend his own diagnosis. This is theater, not justice. The law requires us to investigate accusations of. The law also requires evidence. Show me evidence. Show me one single thing this girl has done that could be called witchcraft by any rational standard. His voice was scathing. I expected better judgment from men of your positions. The Duchess spoke then, her voice shaking but determined. Your protection of this girl only makes the accusations more credible. People are already talking. They're saying she's gained improper influence over you. If you continue to shield her, you risk not only your reputation but your son's future. Let's talk about my son's future, the Duke said. If I allow you to drive away the one person who can heal him, if I bow to these accusations and let fear win, what message does that send? That we should always believe the loudest voice. That truth doesn't matter if it comes from the wrong mouth. His jaw tightened. I am trying to save our son's sight, and you are trying to save your pride. Which of us is thinking about his future? Sir Edmund tried to restore order. Perhaps a compromise. The girl could continue her treatments, but under supervision. No, Mary's voice cut through. Everyone turned. I'm sorry, but no, I won't work under Dr. Whitmore's supervision. He's already shown he cares more about protecting his reputation than about the truth. She looked directly at the Duke. Your Grace, I can heal your son. I'm certain of it now. I've already seen improvement. But I can't do it if I'm constantly defending myself against accusations. What are you saying? The Duke asked quietly. Mary took a breath. This was it, the moment that would decide everything. Give me 1 month, 30 days. Let me treat your son without interference, without supervision, without anyone questioning every move I make. If at the end of that month there's no improvement, if his eyes are no better than they are today, I'll leave. Forever. I'll accept whatever judgment you want to impose. And if there is improvement, the Duke asked, his eyes locked on hers. Then you'll know who lied, and you'll know who to trust. The room erupted. The Duchess objecting, the magistrate arguing, the deacon citing church law, everyone talking at once, everyone certain they knew better. The Duke raised one hand, silence fell. 30 days, he said. Your Grace, the Duchess began. 30 days, Miss Ashford will continue her treatments without interference. She will have full access to the nursery and any supplies she requires. Anyone who attempts to prevent her from doing her work will answer to me directly. He looked at each of them in turn. At the end of 30 days, we will assess the child's condition. If there's no improvement, Miss Ashford has given her word she'll leave. If there is improvement, then every person in this room will owe her an apology. Sir Edmund looked uncomfortable. Your Grace, we cannot simply ignore. You can and you will, because the alternative is that I use every ounce of political influence I inherited from my father to make your lives extremely difficult. The Duke's voice was firm. Gentlemen, Mrs. Pemberton will show you out. The magistrate and deacon left, reluctant but outmaneuvered. The Duchess remained. She stood very still, looking at her husband. Hurt, fury, fear, all of it mixed together into something terrible and sad. You're choosing her, the Duchess said quietly. I'm choosing our son. They're the same thing now, can't you see that? No, the Duke said gently, but without yielding. I see a woman who let fear make her small, who needed someone to blame when she was frightened, who chose convenience over her child's chance at healing. His voice dropped. I know you were frightened, Catherine, but fear doesn't excuse cruelty. I can't apologize to a servant. Then apologize to yourself for letting fear make you small. The Duchess turned and fled, her silk skirts rustling, her shoulders shaking. The door closed. Mary and the Duke stood in the sudden silence.
Thank you, Mary said Finn.
Ally, her voice shook. Your Grace, what you just risked. Don't thank me yet, he looked at her seriously. If you're wrong about this, the scandal will destroy both of us. Are you certain, truly certain? Mary thought of her grandmother's steady hands, her mother's quiet confidence. 3 generations of women who had learned to see what others missed, who had trusted observation over authority, who had saved lives that educated men had written off as lost causes.
I'm certain, she said.
The Duke nodded once. Then we have 30 days to prove them all wrong. He started toward the door, then paused and looked back at her. Miss Ashford, don't make me regret believing in you.
It wasn't a threat, it was a plea.
I won't, Mary promised. After he left, she stood alone in the blue room, her heart racing, her hands trembling with the enormity of what she'd just committed to.
30 days.
30 days to heal a child, save her own life, and prove that truth still mattered in a world built on lies and power, and the assumption that people like her didn't know anything worth knowing. She closed her eyes and sent a prayer to her mother, her grandmother, and every woman who had ever been called a witch for knowing too much.
Then she went to prepare the evening's treatment.
The real work was only just beginning. If you've ever been blamed for something you didn't do, if you've ever felt the weight of a lie that wasn't yours, stay with this story, because what happens next will restore your faith in truth. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss these stories of justice and redemption.
Part 2: The Weight of Truth.
The first week passed like a held breath. Mary moved through the manor like a ghost, visible only when she needed to be. Dawn and dusk found her in the nursery, her hands steady as she applied the warm compresses, her voice soft as she sang the old songs her mother had taught her, not spells, just melodies to soothe a restless infant while medicine did its work. The baby was responding, small changes, barely perceptible to anyone who didn't know what to look for, but Mary saw them. The way his eyes moved toward the window when she opened the curtains slightly, the way his pupils contracted more quickly when she passed her hand between him and the candlelight, the way the milky film seemed thinner at the edges, like morning fog beginning to burn away. She recorded everything in a small journal the Duke had given her. Dates, times, observations, evidence he'd called it, proof that she wasn't working in darkness and mystery but in careful, documented process. The Duke came to watch sometimes. He never stayed long, propriety demanded that much, but he would stand in the doorway, silent, his eyes moving between Mary and his son with an expression she couldn't quite name, hope warring with fear, trust fighting doubt.
On the 8th day, she let him hold the baby during the treatment.
Support his head, Mary instructed gently, guiding the Duke's hands. That's right, now just keep him still while I apply the compress. He might fuss, the warmth startles him sometimes. The Duke held his son with the careful reverence of a man handling something infinitely precious and infinitely breakable. When the baby's face scrunched and he let out a small cry, the Duke's whole body tensed. He's all right, Mary said softly. It's just surprise, not pain. Talk to him. Let him hear your voice.
I don't know what to say.
Tell him about his future. Tell him what you hope for him. The Duke was quiet for a moment. Then, in a voice so low Mary had to strain to hear it, I hope you'll see the world clearly. I hope you'll see truth even when it's hard to look at. I hope you'll be braver than your father, kinder than your mother, wiser than both of us combined. His voice cracked slightly. I hope you'll forgive us for all the ways we've already failed you.
Mary had to look away, her throat tight. When the treatment was finished and the baby settled back in his cradle, the Duke lingered.
Miss Ashford, he said quietly, why are you doing this? Truly, you could have left when I first brought you back. You could have accepted payment and disappeared to somewhere safe. Instead you stayed, knowing the danger, knowing the accusations would come. He looked at her directly. Why? Mary considered lying, considered giving him an answer that was safe and expected, duty, gratitude, Christian charity. But the man had risked everything to give her a chance. He deserved truth. Because no one else would, she said simply. Because I was there when he was born, and I was the only one who looked at him and saw a child who could be saved rather than a problem to be managed. Because I know what it's like to be dismissed, to be told you don't matter, to have people look right through you like you're not even human. She paused. And because my mother died trying to save someone else's child, if I walked away from yours. When I knew I could help him, I'd dishonor everything she taught me. The Duke studied her face for a long moment. You're remarkable, he said, and I don't mean that as flattery, I mean it as observation. You're the most remarkable person in this entire household, and you're the only one everyone thinks is worthless. Your Grace. Do you know what my father told me before he died? He said the measure of a man or a woman isn't in their rank or education or how many people bow to them. It's in what they do when no one's watching, when there's no reward and every reason to walk away. The Duke's voice was quiet but intense. You're being tested by fire, Miss Ashford, and you're proving to be pure gold. Heat flooded Mary's cheeks. I'm just trying to help a child. No, you're showing the rest of us what integrity looks like. Before Mary could respond, Mrs. Pemberton appeared, her face tight with worry. Your Grace, the Duchess has called for a gathering in the drawing room, the entire household staff. She's demanding they all attend. Her eyes flicked to Mary. I think she's planning something. The Duke's expression hardened. I'll attend. Stay here, Miss Ashford. That's not a request, it's an order. He left before she could argue. Mary stood in the quiet nursery, the baby sleeping peacefully in his cradle, and felt the cold finger of dread trace down her spine. Whatever the Duchess was planning, it wouldn't be good. And the Duke, for all his protection, couldn't shield her from everything. She was right to be afraid. The confrontation came at midnight. Mary woke to shouting, doors slamming, the heavy tread of boots on the stairs, too many boots, too purposeful. She sat up, her heart hammering, and reached for her shawl. The door burst open. Two footmen stood there, their faces grim and apologetic in equal measure. Behind them, the Duchess, her face white with righteous fury. And behind her, Sir Edmund Hartley, the magistrate, looking exhausted and deeply uncomfortable. Mary Ashford, Sir Edmund said formally, I am placing you under arrest on suspicion of attempting to harm the Duke's heir. The world tilted. What? Mary's voice came out as a whisper. On what evidence, what has happened, is the baby? The baby is gravely ill, the Duchess said, her voice shaking with what might have been genuine fear or perfectly performed terror. He's been crying for hours. He won't eat. His eyes are swollen and red. Dr. Whitmore examined him and said it's consistent with poisoning, with something applied directly to his eyes. No, that wasn't possible. I used eyebright and chamomile, Mary said urgently. Standard herbs. I've used them dozens of times. They don't cause. Dr. Whitmore found traces of belladonna in the compressed cloths, the Duchess said. Mary's blood turned to ice. That's a lie. I would never. The evidence speaks for itself. Sir Edmund nodded to the footmen. Take her. They moved forward. Mary pulled away from their hands. Where is the Duke? He needs to know. His Grace has been informed, Sir Edmund said. He's with his son now, and he's the one who sent for me. The words hit like a physical blow. The Duke had sent for the magistrate. The Duke believed she'd poisoned his son. No, he couldn't, he wouldn't, not after everything. I need to see him, Mary said desperately. Please, just let me explain. You'll have the opportunity to explain at your hearing. Sir Edmund's voice was not unkind, but it was immovable. For now, you're to be held in the manor's cellar. Mary looked at the Duchess. You did this, you planted the belladonna. I did nothing but protect my child from a dangerous woman. The Duchess's voice was steady, but something flickered in her eyes. Fear, guilt, triumph. You poisoned my son, you'll hang for it. The footman took Mary's arms, gentle but inexorable. She didn't fight. What was the point? She was a servant accused by a duchess. The outcome was already decided. As they led her down the stairs, Mary caught a glimpse of the nursery door, closed, guarded. She could hear crying from within, the baby's wails weak and pained. Her heart broke. Whatever the Duchess had done, that innocent child was suffering for it. The cellar was exactly as cold and dark as Mary had feared. They locked her in a small stone room that had probably been a wine vault once. No windows, no light except what leaked under the door from the guard's lantern in the corridor. A single wooden bench, a bucket in the corner. Mary sat on the bench and pulled her shawl tight around her shoulders. She didn't cry, crying wouldn't help. Instead, she thought. Belladonna Deadly Nightshade. It caused pupil dilation, redness, pain. Applied to the eyes, it would create exactly the symptoms the Duchess had described. And it grew wild in the estate's woods. Mary had seen it herself, had warned the kitchen staff to keep well away from it when foraging for herbs. Someone had picked it, prepared it, added it to the compressed cloths. But who had access to the cloths? Mary prepared them fresh each time in the nursery. She never left them unattended. Except the morning treatment. She'd been called away by Mrs. Pemberton, something about a delivery at the kitchen door that needed her attention. It had seemed urgent. Mary had left the prepared compress on the table in the nursery for just 5 minutes. When she'd returned, the wet nurse had been in the room, tidying. Mary had thought nothing of it. She'd applied the compress as usual. But what if someone had added the belladonna during those 5 minutes? The wet nurse, young, nervous, easily intimidated, the kind of person who would do what she was told by someone with authority. Mary needed to talk to her, but locked in a cellar with guards at the door, she couldn't talk to anyone. She closed her eyes and tried to think. The Duke, he would investigate, he would question everyone, he wouldn't just accept the Duchess's word. Unless he was too devastated by his son's suffering to think clearly. Mary pulled the bronze locket from beneath her dress and held it tight. "Mama," she whispered into the darkness, "I need you to show me how to fight this." But the dead offered no counsel, and the darkness offered no comfort. Mary sat alone with her truth, knowing it might not be enough to save her. Hours passed, then the lock turned. The door opened, lamplight spilled in, blinding after so long in darkness. Mary shielded her eyes. Mrs. Pemberton stepped into the cell. Behind her, the guards started to follow, but Mrs. Pemberton turned and gave him a look that could have frozen boiling water. "I'll speak to the prisoner alone, His Grace's orders, unless you'd like to explain to the Duke why you're countermanding him." The guard stepped back. The door closed, leaving them in the circle of lamplight. "Are you hurt?" Mrs. Pemberton asked. "No, just cold. The baby, how is he?" Recovering, the Duke brought in a different physician from London, a real one this time, not Dr. Whitmore. The new doctor identified the belladonna immediately and administered the antidote. "The child will be fine, frightened and in pain, but fine." Relief flooded through Mary so intensely she had to put her head in her hands. "Thank God." "The Duke knows it wasn't you," Mrs. Pemberton said quietly. Mary's head snapped up. "He does." He never believed it was, not for a moment, but the evidence, the belladonna on the compressed cloths, the Duchess's accusation, the magistrate's presence, he had no choice but to allow your arrest. If he'd refused, it would have looked like a cover-up. It would have destroyed any chance you had at a fair hearing. "So he sent me here to protect me." "He sent you here to buy time, to investigate, to find proof of your innocence before the magistrate could railroad you into a trial you'd never survive." Mrs. Pemberton leaned closer. "And he's found something, or rather, someone found him." "Who?" "The wet nurse, Sarah. She came to the Duke last night, hysterical, confessing everything." Mrs. Pemberton's voice was grim. "The Duchess approached her 3 days ago, told her that you were poisoning the baby slowly, that the only way to prove it was to add something to the compress that would make the baby visibly ill, told her she'd be protecting the heir, saving his life." "She believed it." "She's 18 years old and terrified of losing her position. The Duchess is very persuasive when she wants to be." Mrs. Pemberton paused. "But Sarah's not stupid. When the baby started screaming in pain, when she saw you arrested, she realized she'd been used. She went to the Duke and told him everything. Who gave her the belladonna, how much to use, what to say if anyone asked questions." Mary could barely breathe. "Will she testify?" "She already has, to the Duke, in writing, with her signature." Mrs. Pemberton's smile was grim. "And there's more." Sarah remembered something she overheard the night of the birth. The Duchess and Dr. Whitmore arguing in the birthing room after you'd been dismissed. She heard the Duchess say, "If the child is born damaged, everyone will pity me. But if he's born perfect and becomes damaged later, they'll blame me. Better to establish his defects now while I can control the narrative." Mary felt sick. She wanted him to be declared blind. Worse, she asked Dr. Whitmore if there was any way to ensure the blindness was permanent, if there were any treatments that should be withheld to prevent recovery. "Dear God." Dr. Whitmore refused. To his credit, there were limits even he wouldn't cross, but he agreed to declare the child incurable and to support the Duchess's version of events. In exchange, she would recommend him to all her London friends, ensure he became the most sought-after physician in society. Mary's hands were shaking. Why? Why would she do that to her own child?
See,
Antral, Mrs. Pemberton said simply, a blind heir would need his mother, would depend on her, would never truly be able to rule the duchy without her guidance. The Duke would need her too. She would never be set aside, never lose her power. The housekeeper's voice was cold with disgust. A woman so terrified of being irrelevant that she would damage her own child to ensure her own necessity. The pieces fell into place, like a puzzle Mary hadn't wanted to solve. Sarah's testimony, Mary said urgently, is it enough? Enough to prove you're innocent? Yes. Enough to convict the Duchess? Mrs. Pemberton's expression darkened. That's more complicated. Sarah's word against a duchess's is worth nothing, I know. Mary stood, pacing the small cell, but it's still truth, it's still evidence. It's still exactly what we need, a new voice said from the doorway. Mary spun. The Duke stood there, lamplight casting shadows across his face. He looked exhausted, eyes hollow, jaw tight with barely controlled fury, but when he looked at Mary, something in his expression softened. Miss Ashford, I owe you an apology. No, Mary shook her head. You did what you had to do, I understand. Do you understand that I had to watch you be dragged away, accused of poisoning my son, and couldn't stop it? That I had to spend the last 12 hours investigating my own wife for attempting to murder our child's future while you sat in this cell, probably thinking I'd abandoned you. The rawness in his voice made Mary's chest ache. I never thought that, not for a moment. He cleared his throat and turned to Mrs. Pemberton. Leave us, please. Mrs. Pemberton looked between them, her expression knowing and concerned. Your Grace, propriety has already been sacrificed on the altar of my wife's ambition. I'll speak with Miss Ashford alone. Close the door behind you. Mrs. Pemberton left, though her expression said clearly she thought this was a terrible idea. The Duke waited until her footsteps faded. Then he moved into the cell and sat on the bench, gesturing for Mary to join him. She sat, acutely aware of how close they were, how inappropriate this was, how little she cared about propriety when the truth was finally coming to light. Sarah's testimony is compelling, the Duke said quietly, but you're right, it's not enough on its own to convict my wife. A servant's word, even in writing, can be dismissed as bitterness, as lies told under pressure. So I'm doing something more. What? Tomorrow morning, I'm calling a formal hearing in the Great Hall. The magistrate, the bishop's representative, every member of the household, selected neighbors who witnessed the initial accusations. Everyone who has an interest in this case will be present. I'm going to present Sarah's testimony publicly. I'm going to present the new physician's findings about the belladonna. I'm going to make my wife defend herself in front of everyone who matters. She'll deny it. I know, that's why I need you to do something for me. His eyes were locked on hers. I need you to stand in that hall and tell the truth, all of it. Everything that happened from the moment you delivered my son to the moment you were arrested. Every detail, every observation, every moment of doubt or certainty. I need you to speak with the same clarity and courage you showed when you offered to treat him in the first place. Your Grace, I'm just a... If you say just a servant, I will seriously consider having you arrested again for the crime of self-deprecation. There was the ghost of humor in his voice, though his eyes remained serious. Your testimony isn't worthless, it's the only testimony that matters. Mary's throat tightened. What if they don't believe me? Then we lose. The Duchess maintains her position, you're convicted, and my son grows up with a mother who is willing to sacrifice his sight for her own comfort. The Duke's jaw clenched. But I don't think we'll lose, because I've learned something in the past 2 weeks. What? That truth has a weight to it, a gravity. It pulls things into alignment whether people want it to or not. And your truth, he looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch, is strong enough to bend the world. Mary wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that her words could matter, that her truth could compete with the Duchess's lies, that the system might, just this once, choose justice over convenience. I'll testify, she said quietly. I'll tell them everything. But Your Grace, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that it won't be enough, That power will triumph over truth like it always does. The Duke reached out and took her hand. The touch was brief, appropriate, but it sent warmth flooding through Mary's cold fingers. "Then we'll lose together," he said, "but we'll lose knowing we fought for what was right, and that's worth more than winning by staying silent."
Age.
He stood and moved toward the door. "Get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow everything changes." After he left, Mary sat in the darkness, her hand still warm from his touch, her heart full of terrible, fragile hope. One day, one hearing, one chance to speak truth into a world that had been built on lies. She closed her eyes and prayed to her mother, her grandmother, every woman who had ever been silenced. Tomorrow she would speak. And the world would have to listen. The great hall hadn't been used for a formal gathering in over a decade. Mary stood at the servants' entrance, watching as footmen threw open the heavy velvet curtains, revealing tall windows that looked out over frost-covered grounds. The long oak table had been polished until it gleamed. Chairs lined both sides, enough seating for 30 people, perhaps more. Half the county had come, ladies in winter furs, gentlemen in dark coats. The local gentry who had witnessed her humiliation weeks before now gathered again with the eager curiosity of people who sensed scandal and wanted to witness it firsthand. At the head of the table, the Duke sat in his father's old chair. His face was a mask of careful neutrality, but Mary could see the tension in his shoulders. To his right sat Sir Edmund Hartley, looking deeply uncomfortable. To his left, Deacon Morris, the bishop's representative, his expression one of stern disapproval. The Duchess sat across from the Duke, separated by the length of the table. She wore deep blue, her best color, and her hair was arranged in perfect curls. She looked like innocence itself, like a mother wronged. Her hands were folded demurely in her lap. Only the rapid pulse at her throat betrayed her fear. Dr. Whitmore sat beside her, summoned back from London by ducal command. He looked gray and ill, his confident bearing from weeks ago completely eroded. Mary took her place at a small table set apart from the main gathering, the accused's position. She kept her eyes down as the room settled, but she could feel the weight of dozens of stares. Curiosity, judgment, pity, disgust, the full spectrum of human reaction to a servant accused of poisoning a noble child. Sir Edmund stood. "We are gathered here today to hear evidence in the matter of Mary Ashford, accused of attempting to harm the infant heir to the Ashworth Duchy. This is not a trial that will come later if warranted, but rather a formal inquiry to determine if charges should proceed. All present are bound to speak truth. False testimony will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." The Duke rose. "I've called this inquiry because my son's life and Miss Ashford's reputation both hang in the balance, and because I believe the truth has been deliberately obscured by people who should have been protecting an innocent child. Today, that ends. Today, this house will either serve justice or surrender to comfortable lies." The clerk read the accusations in a monotone: belladonna on the compressed cloths, the child's subsequent illness, the Duchess's testimony regarding suspicious behavior. Then Sir Edmund called the first witness. "Dr. Whitmore, please stand and give your testimony." The physician rose slowly. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days, his carefully constructed reputation crumbling around him. "You examined the Duke's son shortly after his birth. What did you find?" Dr. Whitmore swallowed. The child appeared to be blind. His eyes showed no response to light. "I concluded the condition was permanent." "On what basis?" "My training, my experience, the presentation of the symptoms." "How long did you examine the infant?" Silence. "Dr. Whitmore, how long?" "Perhaps 5 minutes, no more than 10. A murmur ran through the room. "5 to 10 minutes, Sir Edmund repeated, "and in that time you declared a newborn infant permanently blind." "I saw no evidence that treatment would help, in cases like these." "What cases?" The Duke's voice cut across the physician's. "How many newborns with eye conditions have you treated, doctor?" Dr. Whitmore went pale. "In my practice, I don't often attend births." "How many, including your son?" "1." The murmur became a buzz. Someone in the back let out a derisive snort. "You examined one newborn," the Duke said, his voice dangerously quiet, "for less than 10 minutes, and declared him incurably blind. Are you familiar with the condition known as congenital membrane opacity, neonatal keratopathy? Dr. Whitmore blinked. These are highly specialized. They are the medical terms for conditions that are treatable if caught early, conditions that a physician with proper training would have tested for. Did you perform any such tests? The equipment wasn't. Did you ask for equipment? Did you consult other physicians? Did you suggest waiting even a few days to see if the child's eyes would develop normally? The Duke leaned forward. Or did you simply assume, based on 5 minutes of cursory examination, that nothing could be done? Dr. Whitmore's mouth opened and closed. No sound emerged. I've brought in a second physician, the Duke said. Dr. James Thornberry from London, one of England's leading experts in infant medicine. I'd like him to present his findings. An older man stood from the audience, silver-haired, wearing spectacles, with the calm authority of someone who knew his expertise was unassailable. He moved to stand beside Dr. Whitmore, who looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. Dr. Thornberry, what did you find when you examined the child? I found a mild case of congenital membrane opacity, a thin film over both eyes that is relatively common in newborns and almost always resolves with time and proper treatment. I found evidence of recent belladonna exposure, which I treated with atropine and supportive care. The child has made full recovery from the poisoning. Dr. Thornberry glanced at Dr. Whitmore with barely concealed contempt. I also found evidence of significant improvement in the membrane condition, consistent with the application of appropriate herbal treatments. In your professional opinion, was the child ever permanently blind? No, he had a treatable condition that would have resolved on its own within weeks, possibly faster with intervention. Any physician with proper training in infant medicine would have recognized this. Dr. Thornberry placed a small journal on the table, Mary's journal. Miss Ashford kept detailed records of the child's progress, dates, times, observations of pupil response, notes on the thinning of the membrane. This is better documentation than I see from half the physicians in London. The Duchess stared at the journal like it was a snake. In your professional opinion, did Miss Ashford's treatments harm the child in any way? None whatsoever. In fact, her treatments likely accelerated his recovery. She did everything right. Mary's eyes burned. She kept her gaze fixed on the table. The Duchess, please stand, Sir Edmund said. The Duchess rose gracefully, her expression one of wounded dignity. She looked like a woman being unjustly questioned, like a mother forced to defend herself against absurd accusations. Please describe the events that led to Miss Ashford's arrest. I discovered her alone with my son. He was crying in pain. His eyes were red and swollen. I immediately called for Dr. Whitmore, who confirmed my worst fears. The child had been poisoned. The Duchess's voice carried the perfect calibration of strength and vulnerability. I did what any mother would do. I protected my son. The Duke stood. Catherine, why didn't you ever ask me about the treatments? The Duchess blinked. You were clearly not thinking rationally where that girl was concerned. I was thinking perfectly rationally. I'd consulted medical texts. I'd researched the herbs she was using. I'd watched every treatment personally. You never asked because you didn't want to know, because as long as you didn't know the details, you could maintain your narrative that she was dangerous. The Duke's eyes were cold. When did you first approach Sarah, the wet nurse? The Duchess went very still. I don't know what you're talking about. Sarah, young girl, about 18, works in the nursery. When did you first tell her that Miss Ashford was poisoning our son? I never. Sarah has given sworn testimony that you approached her 3 days before the incident, that you gave her belladonna and told her to add it to the compressed cloths to prove your theory. The Duke's voice was relentless. Was her testimony false? She's lying, she's a servant, she'll say anything. She's terrified, the Duke corrected. She came to me in tears, convinced she'd killed my son by following your orders. She had no reason to lie. In fact, the truth implicates her in poisoning. But she told it anyway because she couldn't live with the guilt. He gestured to the back of the room. Sarah stood, young, pale, shaking. Sarah, please tell everyone what you told me. Sarah's voice was barely audible. Her Grace came to me 3 days ago. She said Miss Ashford was hurting the baby. She said the only way to prove it was to make him sick so everyone could see. She gave me a powder. I didn't know it was poison, I swear. Tears streamed down her face. She told me to add it to the compressed cloths when Miss Ashford wasn't looking. She said I'd be saving the baby's life. She said I'd be a hero. And did you add the powders? Yes, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to hurt him. I know, the Duke said quietly. You were manipulated by someone who knew exactly how to exploit your fear and loyalty. He turned back to the Duchess. Well, Catherine, what do you say to this? The Duchess's face was white. She's misremembering. I may have expressed concerns about Miss Ashford, but I would never harm my own child. Wouldn't you? The voice came from Mrs. Pemberton. Standing at the back of the room, holding a small wooden box. She walked forward and placed it on the table in front of Sir Edmund. Your Grace asked me to search for any correspondence that might be relevant to this inquiry, she said. I found this in Her Grace's private writing desk this morning. The Duke opened the box. Inside were letters, dozens of them. He selected one and began to read aloud. Dearest mother, I write to you in distress. The child is born, but he is not as I hoped. If he proves to be less than extraordinary, I fear my position here will crumble. William has no use for weakness. The Duke's voice was steady, but Mary could hear the hurt beneath it. He selected another letter. The physician has confirmed my fears. The child cannot see. At first I was devastated, but now I see the opportunity in it. A blind heir will need constant guidance. He will never truly rule without me. William will need me to help raise him. I will be indispensable. I will finally matter. Silence filled the hall, the kind of silence that comes when something monstrous is revealed in plain daylight. He selected a third letter, his hands shaking slightly now. Dr. Whitmore came today with disturbing news. He says there may be treatments that could restore the child's sight, some common herbs, some old wives' remedy. I told him absolutely not. He seemed troubled, but he agreed to tell no one about the possible treatments. I've promised him introductions to all the best families in London. His silence is bought. The Duke set the letter down. His voice when he spoke was almost inaudible. You knew he could be healed. You knew from the beginning, and you chose to keep him blind because it served your purposes. The Duchess stood frozen, her perfect composure shattered. William, you don't understand. I was frightened. I didn't know how to be a mother to a child who might. Might what? Might not need you desperately enough, the Duke's voice broke. He's an infant, Catherine. He's our son, and you were willing to cripple him for life to ensure your own importance. I was trying to protect my position. Your father cast aside your mother the moment she stopped being useful to him. I saw what happened to her. I knew it would happen to me unless I made myself necessary. So you decided to make yourself necessary by damaging our child. I didn't, the midwife did that. The midwife saved him, the Duke's voice silenced the room. Mary Ashford did everything right. She delivered him safely. She identified his condition. She offered treatment when no one else would, and you repaid her by trying to destroy her life to cover your own sins. He moved around the table toward the Duchess. She shrank back. You accused her of witchcraft. You had her cast out to die in winter. When that didn't work, you framed her for poisoning. You were willing to see her hang, an innocent woman, to protect yourself from the consequences of your own choices. The Duke stopped in front of his wife, looking at her with something beyond anger, something like grief. I tried to build a life with you despite everything. I thought we could at least have respect, partnership. But there's no coming back from this, Catherine. The Duchess's face crumpled. She reached for him. William plays. He stepped back. Don't. He turned to Sir Edmund. I want a formal separation. I want her removed from this house. I want every legal protection in place to ensure she never has unsupervised access to my son again. And I want Miss Ashford's name cleared completely, publicly, with a formal apology from everyone who accused her. Sir Edmund looked deeply uncomfortable. Your Grace, a separation from your wife, the scandal, will be nothing compared to the scandal of allowing her to remain in a position where she can continue to harm innocent people. The Duke's voice was iron. My decision is final. He turned to address the entire room. Let me be clear to everyone present. Mary Ashford is innocent of all charges. She acted with skill, compassion, and expertise to save my son's sight when everyone else, including trained physicians, had given up. She endured false accusations, physical violence, and imprisonment, and yet she never stopped trying to help a child who could not defend himself. The Duke looked directly at Mary for the first time since the hearing began. She is the reason my son will see the world. She is the reason truth won today, and I will spend the rest of my life ensuring that her name is spoken with the respect it deserves. Mary couldn't breathe, couldn't speak, could only stare at him through blurring eyes. The charges are dismissed, Sir Edmund said formally. Miss Ashford is free to go, and I believe, he looked around the room at all the assembled witnesses, I believe we all owe this young woman our deepest apologies. Someone in the back began to applaud, then another, then more, the sound. Built until the entire hall was filled with it, not universal, some people sat with arms crossed, but enough to matter. Mary stood on shaking legs. The Duke gestured to someone at the side door. Mrs. Pemberton entered, carrying a small bundle wrapped in white linen. "The baby." She brought him to Mary, placed him carefully in her arms. The weight was familiar now, comforting. Mary looked down at the tiny face, at the eyes that were clearer than they'd been even 3 days ago. "Show them," the Duke said softly. Mary carried the baby to the center of the room where the light was best. Gently, with practiced hands, she unwrapped the soft bandage over his eyes. The baby blinked in the sudden brightness. His eyes, still slightly cloudy but visibly better, moved across the room, tracking, searching. Mary turned him toward the Duke. The baby's gaze found his father's face and locked on it. His small mouth curved into something that might have been recognition, might have been a smile. The Duke made a sound, half laugh, half sob. He crossed the space between them and cupped his hand against his son's head. "He sees me," the Duke whispered. "He actually sees me." "Yes," Mary said, her voice thick with tears. "He sees you." The room full of witnesses saw it too, saw the miracle that folk medicine and desperate faith had accomplished when educated experts had declared it impossible. Mary looked around at all the faces, some amazed, some skeptical, some moved to tears. She saw Dr. Whitmore sitting with his head in his hands, saw the Duchess standing alone, abandoned by the social circle that had once surrounded her, saw Sarah the nursemaid weeping with relief, saw Mrs. Pemberton smiling fiercely. She should feel triumph, vindication, the satisfaction of being proven right. But all Mary felt was exhaustion and relief. She'd saved a child, that's all she'd wanted, that's all that mattered. "The hearing is concluded," the Duke said. "Justice has been served." The room began to empty. Mary stood in the center of the hall, suddenly alone despite being surrounded by people. Outside, she sat on a stone bench in the winter garden and pulled her shawl tight around her shoulders. She'd won, against all odds, truth had won. But the cost, the Duchess's life destroyed, Dr. Whitmore's reputation ruined, Sarah carrying guilt forever, the Duke losing his marriage, so much damage, so much pain. All because people had chosen pride over truth, convenience over courage, comfortable lies over difficult honesty. Mary pulled out her mother's locket and held it tight. "I did it, Mama," she whispered. "I kept my promise. I used what you taught me. I helped someone." The wind carried her words away into the gathering twilight. Behind her, the great house blazed with light. Inside, a baby with healing eyes slept in his father's arms. And Mary Ashford, the servant girl that everyone had tried to erase, breathed the cold air and let the relief wash over her in slow waves. It was over. Finally, it was over. If your heart is racing right now, if you need to know what happens next between Mary, the Duke, and that innocent child, stay with me. The truth has won the battle, but the real miracle is still coming. Subscribe so you're here when justice becomes something even greater than vindication. Part 3: The Life Truth Built. 5 days after the hearing, Mary stood in the blue room, packing the few possessions she'd accumulated during her stay. It wasn't much: the borrowed dresses Mrs. Pemberton had given her, the journal where she'd documented the baby's progress. The Duke had said she should keep it. A small purse of coins, payment for her services, far more generous than she'd expected, and her mother's bronze locket, which had never left her neck. Everything fit into a single canvas bag. The baby was thriving. His eyes grew clearer each day, the membrane thinning to almost nothing. Dr. Thornberry had examined him again yesterday and declared that within a fortnight, the The child would have completely normal vision. The treatments could stop. The crisis was over. Which meant Mary's purpose here was fulfilled. She'd known this moment would come, had known from the beginning that her time at Ashworth Manor was temporary, borrowed, contingent on being needed. Now that the baby was healing, now that her name was cleared, now that justice had been served, there was no reason for her to stay. The Duke had offered her a permanent position. Household healer, he'd called it. A cottage on the grounds, a generous salary, respect, and security for as long as she wanted it. She'd thanked him and said she needed time to think about it. It was a lie. She'd already made her decision. She couldn't stay here, couldn't walk these halls every day, seeing him, being near him, feeling the weight of something she had no right to feel. The hearing had made things worse, not better. The way he'd defended her, the way he'd looked at her when his son had tracked his face with newly seeing eyes, the way his voice had broken when he'd called her remarkable. It was gratitude, of course it was gratitude, a father's natural affection for the person who'd saved his child, nothing more. And even if it were something more, even if the careful distance he maintained, the way his eyes followed her when he thought she wasn't looking, the slight catch in his voice when he said her name, even if all of that meant what her traitorous heart hoped it meant. What difference would it make? He was a duke, she was a servant. The hearing had cleared her name, but it hadn't changed who she was or where she belonged. Society had rules for people like them, and those rules didn't bend, not even for men who defied their wives and championed the truth. Mary closed the bag and set it by the door. One more treatment this evening, one more night in this beautiful room. Then tomorrow she'd thank the Duke for his generosity, decline his offer as gracefully as possible, and leave for the village. Mrs. Pemberton had connections there, a family who needed a midwife, a room above their shop, honest work that would keep her fed and clothed. It was more than she'd had a month ago, more than she'd dared hope for when she'd been dying in the snow outside these very gates. It should be enough. The fact that it wasn't, that her chest ached at the thought of leaving, that she dreamed about a future she had no business imagining, well, that was her problem to manage. The baby was awake and alert when she arrived in the nursery, his eyes tracking the mobile of carved birds that hung above his cradle. Mary smiled despite herself. A month ago, those eyes had seen nothing but shadows. Now they followed movement, recognized faces, brightened when his father entered the room. It was a miracle, a small, ordinary, impossible miracle. "Hello, little one," Mary said softly, lifting him from the cradle. "Ready for your treatment? Last one, I think. You're almost completely healed." She carried him to the window seat where the light was good and began the familiar ritual. The warm compress, carefully applied, the gentle massage at his temples, the soft songs that had become part of their routine. The baby gazed up at her with eyes that were nearly clear now, just the faintest hint of cloudiness remaining. "You're going to see the whole world," Mary whispered. "Every sunrise, every star, your father's face when he's proud of you. All the beautiful, terrible, wonderful things this life has to offer, you're going to see all of it." Her throat tightened. "And I'm so grateful I got to be part of making that possible." "So am I." Mary's head snapped up. The Duke stood in the doorway. He was in his shirt sleeves, no coat, his cravat loosened, the most informal she'd ever seen him. He looked tired but lighter somehow, as if the weight of the past weeks had finally begun to lift. "Your Grace," Mary started to stand. "I didn't hear you." "Don't get up, please. Finish the treatment." He moved into the room and took his usual chair near the fire. "I came to watch, if you don't mind." She settled back into the rhythm of the treatment, acutely aware of his presence, his attention. The silence between them was comfortable but charged, full of things neither of them were saying. After a few minutes, the Duke spoke. "Dr. Thornberry says you can stop the treatments after tonight, that his eyes are healed enough to finish recovering on their own." "Yes, I agree with his assessment." Mary kept her voice steady. "You have a healthy son, Your Grace, perfect vision, strong constitution. He's going to be fine." "Thanks to you." "Thanks to time and proper care. I just did what needed to be done." "You did considerably more than that." The Duke leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. "Mrs. Pemberton tells me you've declined my offer of a permanent position." Mary's hands stilled for just a moment. I'm very grateful for the offer, but I think it's best if I move on. The village needs a midwife. I can be useful there. You could be useful here. The baby doesn't need me anymore. You have Dr. Thornberry's guidance. You have capable staff. You don't need. I need you. The words fell into the space between them like stones into still water. Mary looked up slowly. The Duke was watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Your Grace, I don't. Let me finish. He stood, crossed to the window, looked out at the darkening grounds. The separation from Catherine is being finalized. She'll return to her family in London with a generous settlement and an agreement never to speak publicly about the circumstances of our parting. Dr. Whitmore's medical license is under review. He'll likely never practice again. Sarah has been given a reference and enough money to start over somewhere her mistake won't follow her. He turned back to face Mary. Everyone involved has faced consequences or received grace according to their actions. Justice has been served. The crisis is resolved. Yes, Mary said carefully. So there's no reason for you to stay. Professionally speaking, your work is done. You should move on to the next family who needs you. He moved closer, stopped a respectful distance away. Except, I find I don't want you to go. Mary's heart stuttered. Your Grace. I've been trying to reason with this feeling for days, trying to convince myself it's just gratitude, just the natural attachment one feels towards someone who's done an incredible service, just the aftermath of crisis making me confused about my own emotions. He looked at her directly. But it's not going away, and I'm tired of lying to myself about what it is. Please don't, Mary whispered. Your Grace, please don't say something you'll regret. What will I regret? Speaking the truth? That seems unlikely, given that you're the one who taught me how valuable truth is. He took another step closer. I have not known what to do, he said quietly, with the feeling of not wanting you to leave. The words hung in the air between them. Mary clutched the baby tighter, needing something to hold onto, needing the weight of him to remind her this was real. I don't understand, she managed. Don't you? The Duke's eyes searched her face. You're the most intelligent person I know, Miss Ashford. You can diagnose conditions that trained physicians miss. You can read people's motives and see through their lies. You can stand in front of a room full of people who want you dead and speak truth with perfect clarity. Don't tell me you don't understand what I'm saying. Mary shook her head. It doesn't matter if I understand. Your Grace, I know my place. I know the distance between us. I know that gratitude can feel like something else when you're in the middle of crisis, but once time passes, once things settle. Do you think I'm confused? The Duke's voice was sharp but not unkind. I am grateful. Of course I'm grateful. You saved my son, but that's not why I don't want you to leave. Then why? Because you see things clearly. Because you speak truth even when it costs you everything. Because you're brave and brilliant and you refuse to be diminished by people who should know better. Because when I'm with you, I feel like I'm finally talking to someone who exists in reality instead of in the performance of social expectation. His voice dropped. Because somewhere between watching you fight for my son and watching you fight for yourself, I fell in love with you. The world stopped. Mary stood frozen, the baby sleeping peacefully in her arms, her mind unable to process what she'd just heard. You can't, she whispered. I can, I have. The Duke's expression was open, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. I know it's impossible. I know society will never accept it. I know that a duke falling in love with a servant is the plot of a bad novel, not something that happens in real life. But here we are, and I am done lying about what I feel just because it's inconvenient or scandalous or not what anyone expects. Your Grace. William plays, my name is William. I can't call you that. Why not? Because it makes this real. Because once I acknowledge that you're not just the Duke, not just my employer, once I see you as William, as a man she stopped, pressed her lips together. A man you what? He asked softly. She shook her head, unable to say it. William moved to the cradle and held out his arms. Mary transferred the sleeping baby to him, careful not to wake him. William settled his son in the cradle with practiced ease now, so different from the terrified uncertainty of weeks ago. When he turned back to Mary, there was nothing between them but air and choice. I saw you when no one else would, he said. When my wife had you cast out, when society declared you worthless, when everyone agreed you were lying or dangerous or both, I saw you. I saw your truth and your courage and your refusal to be made small. I saw who you really are. You saw someone useful, Mary said, someone who could help your son. That's not the same as. You think I can't tell the difference? William's voice was gentle. I saw you working by candlelight, exhausted, singing to a baby who wasn't yours because you couldn't stand the thought of him being frightened. I saw you in that cellar, alone and facing execution, still thinking about how to save him instead of yourself. I saw you stand in front of that room and speak truth when lies would have been safer. He paused. I saw you, Mary, not what you could do for me, you. Mary's defenses crumbled. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. It can't work, she whispered. You're a duke, I'm a servant, society will. Society can adjust. William's voice was firm. I've already defied them by separating from my wife. I've already scandalized them by pioning you over trained physicians. My reputation for propriety is already destroyed. What's one more transgression? Marriage to a servant is not a transgression. It's social suicide. Is it, or is it just living according to my own values instead of inherited ones? William moved closer, close enough that Mary could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes. My father spent his entire life doing what society expected. He married for alliance. He maintained appearances. He never questioned whether the old ways were right. And he died miserable, surrounded by people who respected his title but didn't know him at all. He reached up slowly, giving Mary time to pull away, and gently wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. I don't want that life, he said quietly. I want truth. I want partnership with someone who sees me as clearly as I see them. I want to build something real instead of performing something acceptable. His hand lingered against her face. I want you, Mary, if you'll have me. Mary closed her eyes, leaning into his touch despite every instinct that screamed this was impossible. You don't know what you're asking, she said. The scandal, the gossip. Your son will grow up with people whispering about his father's inappropriate marriage. Your allies will distance themselves. Your political influence will survive or it won't. And if it doesn't, then perhaps it was built on foundations that deserved to crumble. William's thumb traced her cheekbone. Mary, I've spent the last month watching you endure false accusations, imprisonment, and public trial, all while maintaining your dignity and fighting for what was right. Do you really think I'm afraid of gossip? You should be. It will never stop. They'll never accept me. Some won't, some will, and some will pretend to accept you to my face while condemning you behind my back. That's how society works, hypocritical and arbitrary, and obsessed with rules that serve power rather than justice. He smiled slightly. Fortunately, I've recently learned that sometimes the right thing to do is ignore what society expects and trust your own judgment instead. I had a very good teacher. Mary opened her eyes. This is insane. Probably. You'll regret it. I won't. How can you be sure? Because regret comes from choosing comfort over truth, from doing what's easy instead of what's right, from letting fear make your decisions. William's voice was steady. I regret marrying Catherine because I did it for the wrong reasons: duty, expectation, political advantage. I regret not being here when my son was born, but I will never regret choosing you, Mary, even if it's difficult, even if society makes us pay for it. Mary wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him so badly it physically hurt. But one question remained, sharp and cold, beneath everything else. Ask me, William said softly, as if reading her mind. Ask me the question you're afraid to ask. Mary took a shaky breath. Are you asking because you're grateful, because I saved your son and you feel like you owe me something? Or, her voice dropped to barely a whisper, or because you see me? William's hand slid from her face to cradle the back of her head, his fingers gentle in her hair. I see you, he said. I see the girl who learned healing from her mother and grandmother, who carries their knowledge like sacred trust. I see the woman who refused to accept injustice even when it would have been safer to stay silent. I see someone who is brilliant and brave and absolutely terrifying in her moral clarity. His thumb brushed against her temple. I see someone I want to spend the rest of my life learning from. Someone I love, not for what she's done, but for who she is. Mary's last defenses shattered. I see you too, she whispered. I see a man who came home to crisis and chose truth over comfort, who risked everything to give his son a chance at healing, who stood up to his own wife, his own class, his own world because it was right. I see someone who's kinder than he thinks he is, braver than he gives himself credit for. Her voice broke. I see someone I have no business loving, but I do. I love you, William, and it terrifies me. William's eyes closed briefly, his expression one of profound relief. Then stay, he said, stay and let me love you properly. Let me offer you not charity or gratitude or a position in my household, but partnership, a life together, marriage if you'll have it, if you'll have me. People will say you've lost your mind. Let them. They'll say I've seduced you, that I used witchcraft or manipulation. Let them say whatever they need to say to make sense of a world where a duke chooses truth over tradition. I don't care, Mary. I care about you. I care about building a life that's honest and real and worth living. Everything else is just noise. Mary looked at him, really looked at him, at the exhaustion still lay enduring in his eyes from weeks of crisis, at the vulnerability he was showing her, offering himself without pretense or performance, at the man who had chosen to see her when the entire world had declared her invisible. She thought about her mother, who had died trying to save someone else's child, about her grandmother, who had healed people even when the church called her dangerous, about generations of women who had possessed knowledge and courage and had been forced to hide both to survive. What would they tell her to do? The answer came clearly. They would tell her to choose truth, to choose love, to choose the life that was real over the life that was safe. Yes, Mary said. William went very still. Yes. Yes, I'll stay. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes to partnership and honesty and building something real. Mary smiled through her tears. Yes to all of it, even the scandal, even the gossip, even the impossible, insane, beautiful reality of choosing each other. William's face transformed. The careful control he always maintained crumbled, replaced by pure joy. He pulled her into his arms, careful, respectful, giving her every opportunity to pull away. Mary didn't pull away. She leaned into him, let herself be held, let herself feel safe for the first time in longer than she could remember. His heart beat steady against her ear. His arms were strong around her back. I promise you, William said into her hair, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you're valued and respected and seen for exactly who you are. Making sure our children, if we're blessed with them, grow up knowing that truth matters more than status, that courage is worth more than comfort, that their mother is the most remarkable woman I've ever known. Our children, the casual assumption of a future together. Mary's eyes burned with fresh tears. I promise you, she said, that I will always tell you the truth, that I'll fight for what's right even when it's hard, that I'll see you clearly, love you honestly, and never let you forget that you're more than your title. She pulled back just enough to look at his face. And I promise that I'll teach our children everything my mother and grandmother taught me, so that knowledge doesn't die, so that truth keeps speaking. William kissed her then, properly. Softly at first, then deeper as Mary's hands came up to grip his shoulders, as weeks of careful distance and unspoken feelings finally found expression. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, William rested his forehead against hers. When, he asked. When what? When should we marry? Mary laughed, the sound surprising her. We should wait at least a few months. Let the scandal from your separation die down. Let people adjust to the idea that I'm marrying the woman I love instead of doing what's expected. No, William shook his head. I'm done waiting for permission from people who would rather I be miserable and proper than happy and scandalous. If you'll marry me, Mary, I want to do it as soon as legally possible. I want to make it official before anyone can try to talk me out of it. Everyone will try to talk you out of it. Oh, everyone will try. That's exactly why we should do it quickly, before they have time to mount a proper campaign. Mary studied his face. He was serious, completely serious. 3 weeks, she said. Give me 3 weeks to prepare, to make a proper dress, too, she laughed again, to get used to the idea that I'm going to be a duchess. You'll be brilliant at it, William smiled, though you'll have to learn to dance. It's tedious but apparently required. I can dance. Can you? My mother taught me. She said knowing how to move gracefully was part of knowing how to help laboring women move through contractions. The principles are similar: rhythm, breath, trusting your body. William laughed, the sound surprised and delighted. See, you're already making high society sound more interesting than it's been in decades. They stayed that way, the three of them together in the quiet nursery, until William Charles woke enough to be transferred to his cradle. Then Mary and William walked back to their own chambers, hand in hand, through halls that had once been Mary's prison and were now her home. The wedding happened exactly 3 weeks later, just as they'd agreed. It was small, immediate household only, plus Dr. Thornberry and a handful of William's closest friends who had proven themselves trustworthy. No grand society affair. No performance for people whose approval they didn't need. Mary wore a simple dress of cream silk that Mrs. Pemberton had helped her make. William wore gray instead of formal black. They spoke their vows in the estate chapel with genuine feeling instead of social obligation. And when the vicar pronounced them married, when William kissed her in front of their small gathering of witnesses, Mary felt something shift in the universe, a sense of rightin'. As of pieces falling into place. The scandal, of course, was immediate and enormous. A duke marrying his servant, a man of rank choosing a common girl over any number of eligible ladies. Society had been predictably horrified. Invitations dried up. Social connections were quietly severed. William's solicitor spent weeks fielding letters from distant relatives expressing their concern and disappointment. William read the letters aloud to Mary over breakfast, laughing at the more ridiculous ones, rolling his eyes at the ones that tried to sound supportive while clearly being condescending. Then he'd filed them away and gone about his day, completely unbothered. They'll adjust, he told Mary when she worried about the isolation. Or they won't. Either way, I married you because I love you. Their approval isn't required for my happiness. And he was right, some people had adjusted. Dr. Thornberry became a regular visitor, treating Mary as a colleague rather than a curiosity. A few of William's friends, the ones with actual integrity, made the effort to know her, to see past her origins to who she actually was. The neighboring gentry were slower to come around. Some still avoided the Duke and his inappropriate wife. But others, pragmatic people who cared more about results than rules, began quietly consulting Mary when their children were sick, when their wives needed help with difficult pregnancies, when traditional physicians failed them. Respect, Mary had learned, could be earned even from people who initially refused to grant it. It just took time and proof, and the unwavering conviction that her knowledge was valuable regardless of whether they acknowledged it. She built her practice carefully, a still room filled with dried herbs and carefully labeled tinctures, a journal that grew thicker each month with documented cases, the mothers who delivered safely, the children whose fevers had broken, the chronic complaints that had responded to treatments no physician had thought to try. She trained 3 village girls in midwifery, passing on what her own mother had given her, ensuring the knowledge would survive beyond any single pair of hands. The work was quieter than the drama of that December, but it was more important. Every case documented was an argument against dismissal. Every life saved was proof that women's knowledge had always mattered, even when the world refused to say so. 1 year after the hearing, Mary received a letter. It came from Dr. Whitmore, forwarded through several addresses before finally reaching Ashworth Manor. Mary almost threw it away unopened, but curiosity won. She opened it in the still room, alone, bracing herself for accusations or bitterness. Instead, she found an apology. Miss Ashford, I hesitate to call you Your Grace, as I'm aware you may not wish to hear from me at all, let alone be addressed with the title I nearly cost you the chance to earn. I write because I've spent the past year in reflection, and because I owe you truths I was too cowardly to speak when they mattered. You were right about the child's condition. You were right about the treatment. You were right to challenge my diagnosis, and I was wrong to let pride and reputation concerns override medical judgment. I tell myself I was protecting the Duchess, that I believed I was helping by giving her a narrative she could accept. But the truth is that I was protecting myself, my reputation, my standing among wealthy families who pay well and ask few questions. I was willing to declare a child permanently damaged rather than admit I didn't know enough. I was willing to see you destroyed rather than acknowledge that your knowledge was superior to mine. I don't expect forgiveness, I don't deserve it, but I want you to know that what you did, standing up to authority, insisting that truth matters, refusing to accept injustice even when it would have been safer to stay silent, it changed me. I'm teaching now, at a charity hospital in London. Poor patients, no prestige, no wealthy families, just medicine that actually has to work because these people have no other options. It's humbling, it's hard, and it's the most honest work I've ever done. Thank you for that, and I'm deeply, genuinely sorry for the harm I caused you. Dr. Marcus Whitmore. Mary read the letter twice, then set it down. She didn't know what to feel: anger at what he'd done, satisfaction that he'd been forced to face consequences, pity for a man who'd destroyed his own career through cowardice, cautious hope that he might actually become a better physician. All of it, none of it, something more complicated than simple emotion could capture. She folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her journal, not forgiveness, but acknowledgement. Not absolution, but documentation that even people who'd caused harm could sometimes grow toward truth. It wasn't redemption, but it was something. 2 years after the hearing, on a spring moor, when the estate gardens were bursting with early flowers, Mary stood in her bedroom window, watching William and William Charles in the garden below. The boy was nearly 3 now, tall for his age, with his father's gray-green eyes and his mother's stubborn determination. He was currently lecturing William very seriously about the difference between chamomile and feverfew, pointing to the plants with the authority of someone who'd been learning herbs since he could walk. William listened with grave attention, asking questions, praising his son's knowledge, treating the boy's expertise with the same respect he'd shown Mary from the beginning. This, Mary thought, is what we're building: a world where knowledge is valued regardless of who holds it, where children grow up believing that truth matters more than status, where courage is rewarded instead of punished. She touched the bronze locket at her throat, her mother's gift, transformed by William's love. He'd had it restored and engraved with 3 dates on the back: William Charles's birth date, the date he'd been saved by Mary's intervention, and the date Mary and William had married, becoming a family. "Your mother gave you that locket to remind you where you came from," William had said when he gave it back to her. "I wanted to add to it, to remind you where you are now, what you've built, who you've saved. That locket held your past, now it holds our future too." Dignity cannot be taken, her mother had taught her. It can only be denied by those too afraid to recognize it. Mary had been denied her dignity many times, cast out, accused, imprisoned, called a witch and a liar and worse. People had tried to make her small, to silence her, to erase her knowledge and her value. But dignity couldn't be taken, only denied. And Mary had refused to accept that denial, had stood in front of a room full of people who wanted her destroyed and spoken truth anyway, had insisted that her knowledge mattered, that her observations were valid, that her mother's teachings were worth preserving. And slowly, painfully, the world had begun to adjust around her refusal. Not everyone, not everywhere, but enough. Enough to matter, enough to build on, enough to pass to the next generation so they could push further, reach higher, insist on more. 6 months after the hearing, on a crisp autumn morning, Mary had stood in the great hall, the same room where she'd faced accusations and judgment, watching as 20 women from surrounding villages filled the chairs. It was the first official meeting of what William had insisted on calling the Women's Medical Collective. They'd advertised it carefully, an opportunity for women with knowledge of herbs, midwifery, healing, and traditional medicine to gather, share information, and formalize practices that had been passed down orally for generations. Mary had expected maybe 5 women to come, maybe 10 if she was lucky. 20 had shown up, and more kept arriving. Some were midwives like Mary had been, some were village healers, some were simply women who'd learned from mothers and grandmothers and wanted to preserve that knowledge. What they had in common was expertise that had been dismissed and a hunger to be taken seriously. "Thank you all for coming," Mary had said, standing at the head of the table where the Duke had sat during her hearing. "I know some of you traveled far. I know some of you risked criticism by coming here. I want you to know that your presence matters, your knowledge matters." She'd looked around at faces, both nervous and eager. For too long, women's medical knowledge has been called superstition. We've been told that if it's not in a book written by a man, it's not real medicine. We've been dismissed when we speak up, punished when we challenge authority, silenced when we try to share what we know. But we know the truth. We know that the herbs we use work. We know that the techniques we've learned through observation and practice are effective. We know that we've saved lives that trained physicians gave up on. An older woman near the back had raised her hand. "Begging your pardon, Your Grace, but what's to stop them from dismissing all of us together? We're still just women, still not physicians." "You're right," Mary had said. "We're not physicians. We're something better. We're healers who have actually watched treatments work or fail instead of just reading about them in books. We're practitioners who adapt based on results instead of rigidly following doctrine. She'd held up her journal. This is documentation. Dates, times, observations, results. Evidence that can't be dismissed as easily as verbal testimony. Every treatment we do, we document. Every success, every failure, every unexpected outcome, we write it down. We build a record that's too comprehensive to ignore. Margaret from Thornbury had stood then, a midwife of 20 years. I've delivered over 300 babies in Lowe's. Only 2 mothers. The physician in our village has delivered perhaps 50 babies and lost 7 mothers. But when there's a difficult birth, families still call him first because he's a man with credentials. I'm tired of watching women die because people trust his confidence more than my competence. Then we change that, Mary had said firmly. We document your success rate. We document his failure rate. We present evidence to families before they make decisions. We give them information so they can choose based on results instead of assumptions about whose knowledge is valid. They'll call us arrogant, someone else said. They'll say we're overstepping. They will, Mary agreed. They'll call us worse than that, but we keep working anyway. We keep documenting. We keep supporting each other. And eventually, the results speak louder than the criticism. She thought of her own journey, from disgraced servant to respected healer, thought of how long it had taken, how much it had cost, how many times she'd wanted to give up. I won't lie to you, this work is hard. You'll face dismissal and mockery. Some will lose positions. Some will be called witches or charlatans, but some of you will save lives. Some will pass knowledge to daughters and granddaughters. Some will be there when a trained physician gives up and you'll succeed where he failed. And someday, maybe not in our lifetimes, but someday, women's medical knowledge will be taken as seriously as any man's, because we refused to be silenced. Because we insisted that truth matters more than credentials. Because we chose to see clearly when everyone else chose blindness. The silence had lasted only a moment. Then Margaret from Thornbury had stood and begun to applaud. Then another woman and another, until the entire room was filled with the sound of women acknowledging each other, supporting each other, refusing to be diminished. Mary had stood at the head of the table, the bronze locket warm against her skin, and felt her mother's presence like a hand on her shoulder. This is what you taught me to do, Mary had thought. This is the promise I'm keeping. Now William looked up from the garden below and saw her in the window. He smiled, the private smile he saved for her, the one that said, I see you, I love you, I chose you, and I'd choose you again. Mary smiled back and placed her hand over the locket. Below, William Charles noticed his father's distraction and followed his gaze upward. When he saw Mary, his whole face lit up. Mama, come teach me about the yellow flowers. Mary laughed and called down, I'll be right there. She left the window and headed downstairs, through halls where servants greeted her with genuine respect, past the stillroom where women's knowledge was being preserved and documented, into gardens where her son was learning to see the world clearly. This was the life truth had built. Hard-won, impossible, real. And Mary Ashford, who had once been worthless and invisible and condemned, walked into it with her head high and her heart full, carrying 3 generations of women's knowledge into a future that was finally ready to value it. Truth didn't shout, it waited. But when someone had the courage to speak it, when someone chose to see what everyone else refused to, everything changed. Everything. If this story moved you, if you've ever felt invisible until someone finally saw you, I want to hear from you. Leave a comment. Would you have risked everything to save that child, knowing the world would call you a liar? Your stories matter. Subscribe so you never miss a moment of justice, redemption, and the truth that always finds its way to light. And remember, the bravest thing you can do is see clearly when everyone else chooses blindness.